Continuing our discussions on psychoanalysis and Indian tradition, we have taken up 5 texts before. We took up Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutra, Brahma Sutra. We also took up Natya Shastra. Today we take up the 6th text from the Indian tradition, Japji Sahib. Japji Sahib is a text which is found in the Guru Granth Sahib, the holy text of Sikhism. Japji Sahib is the first part of Guru Granth Sahib. Guru Arjan Dev composed Japji Sahib based on teachings of Guru Nanak. Guru Gobind Singh also composed Jap Sahib, which is different from Japji Sahib. Japji Sahib is a short spiritual text, very much on the lines of Upanishads. Upanishads also are short. Upanishads also are mystical, spiritual, rendered in a mystical poetic language. Similarly, Japji Sahib is also a short spiritual text rendered in a poetic language. Essentially, it is a song of a mystic. Mystic, of course, being sage Guru Nanak himself. Japji Sahib is not a intellectual elaboration. It is not a philosophical text. It is a song of a mystic. And like songs of all mystics, it has a poetic element, it has a devotional element, it has an element of adoration of reality of God. In the context of Indian spirituality, Japji Sahib is on the path of Bhakti Marg, the path of devotion. And in Indian spirituality, we see 5 major margas, approaches: the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, the path of action, the path of yoga, which may include Hatha Yoga, Kriya Yoga, yoga in all its forms, and integral yoga, which is a combination of these elements. Japji Sahib essentially is on the path of devotion. And the whole idea here is to invoke grace and purify oneself completely by surrender and devotion. In the central Indian tradition, we find the Vaishnav Marg very close to this approach, the path of Japji Sahib. Let us enter into it, where a psychoanalytic commentary can be made I will make it. We start first with the philosophy of Japji Sahib. Then we'll go into the spiritual process, then into the state of enlightenment, the goal state. And then we'll take a look at, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, what can we profit by from the study of this text. Philosophically, Japji Sahib believes in God, and the God is all pervading. Nothing exists that is not God. Nothing can come out of anywhere except from God, and God is in total control. So the idea here philosophically is of God being one without the second. And that, of course, is also the Vedic idea, a very ancient Vedic idea of there being a God who is one without the second. That God is the eternal truth, the fundamental reality, the source reality from which everything has come, and to which everything will return, and under whose control everything functions. Philosophically speaking, in Japji Sahib, God is one without the second. God is the eternal truth. God is the ground of all existence, and the God is immanent. The idea here is not of a transcendent God who, having once created the creation, is hands off from the creation. The idea here also is not of a duality of God and nature, both existing independently. The idea here also is not of the Advait Vedanta, where we have the Brahma and the Mithya Maya. The idea here is of God, that is the ground, and an immanent God that has constituted, that has thrown himself into manifestation, and everything is manifesting, which is nothing but God. So it is an immanent idea of God. So God is not only a ground and source, God is also immanent in all manifestation. However, the God in its pure eternal form is formless beyond all manifestation. So philosophically, the idea is that a manifestation which is with form emerges out of a formless ground, which is God. So the idea of God here is of a formless eternal source, an omnipotent source, an immanent source, but yet into itself a formless. So in that sense, the only idea of transcendence that comes here is that God himself is formless, and from that formless God, all the forms come out. And here we have to be careful that in Indian spirituality, all schools, the individual's experience of the formless often converts into an intuitive philosophical statement about God being formless. So we have to separate the individual's experience and intuition arising from that experience with what the reality is. What appears to the individual in that state need not be reality. But usually, mystics and spiritual masters posit that knowledge as the knowledge of reality. One of the reasons being there is no other way better than that to have a knowledge of reality in their opinion. This philosophical idea of Japji Sahib is also different from the idea of Dvait school. Most prominently, we all know about ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They believe in a Dvait, a duality, and a God with form. So Japji Sahib does not belong to that philosophical belief. It believes in a formless God. The philosophical problem always remains, how does this formless God turn into form and talk to individuals who are with form? And that is made possible by the idea of omnipotence, that there are no limits to the power of God. And the human intellect cannot restrict God by dictates of his own logic or necessities of logic as they appear to us. Our logic need not be absolute infallible logic. It essentially is creation of our apparatus and cannot go beyond the limits of our apparatus. And our apparatus of thinking is not an infallible apparatus. Philosophically, therefore, Japji Sahib is a theistic philosophy, continues with the ancient Vedic idea of God, of one without the second, also continues with the ancient Vedic idea of there being design in nature, that there is a purpose in existence. It may be a purposeless purpose on the wider time span, but within the time span that we live and we experience the universe, there is a purpose and a design in nature. Design at various levels, purpose at various levels. So there is a purpose and design of universe, a purpose and design behind planet Earth, a purpose and design behind the human species, and a purpose and design behind an individual. And while there is design at work, which automatically limits human free will, that the human free will is not omnipotent, it is severely limited, and there is a design and purpose at work, which is suprahuman. Even while there is a design at work, the creator of the design is himself beyond all laws and all designs. So he enjoys absolute power, absolute freedom. Something that nothing that he has created enjoys. So the creator enjoys omnipotence. Nothing that is created enjoys omnipotence. And there is extension of this omnipotence of God's will even in the life of an individual, the fate of an individual as he experiences life. And this is very parallel to the Jain philosophy where everything is attributed to karma. So in Jain philosophy, we see the omnipotence of karma, and here we see omnipotence of creator. Of course, the Jain philosophy is a Gnostic philosophy, a theistic philosophy, whereas this is a theistic philosophy. But both have an omnipotent object. In Japji Sahib, we have God as omnipotent. In the Jain philosophy, we have the karmic law. That is, I would not say completely omnipotent, but near omnipotent. Philosophy in Japji Sahib not only limits human free will, but also talks about immense power of karma, the principle of karma, which again is an ancient Vedic principle. Grace, which again is an ancient Vedic principle, and the will of God. So this is very much on the line of Upanishads. The idea of karma, the idea of grace, and the idea of will of God. and the limitations are overcome largely by these factors. And it's a very important element to realize here. It needs grace to even search for grace. For a long time, one does not even know of anything called grace, or one dismisses this as irrational. It's only after a long time of search that one learns to appreciate and understand, rather understand and appreciate the concept of grace, and then to start a sincere search, and then the grace appears. Even the search for grace happens only after grace. Japji Sahib also talks about devotion, which can surrender, and devotion which can bring about an inward change. It talks about three things actually: surrender, devotion, and recitation of the Lord's name or a mantra, jap. And it makes it clear that outward rituals cannot destroy inward ignorance, as Shankaracharya puts it. It's the same thing said in different words. Shankaracharya said, outward rituals cannot destroy inner ignorance because the rituals and the ignorance are not mutually contradictory. At the most gross level, if done without inner sincerity and awakening and the guidance of a guru, the rituals become an extension of the inner ignorance. And the Japji Sahib also talks about combining of devotion, service, and action. The foundation is of devotion. And then you have service to others and good deeds as combining there. So we see there a combination of the foundation of Bhakti Yoga and a bit of Karma Yoga coming in. And that goes more on the lines of integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. Very much on those lines, except that Japji Sahib doesn't go much into the Jnana Yoga or the Kriya Yoga. It is a holistic approach, and the central idea, but one of the core techniques is to sing of the Lord different parts, and essentially we see this as a Bhakti marg, the marg of devotion, surrender, and love. The individual philosophy of Japji Sahib is very clear, that there is a purpose for life, and the purpose is enlightenment or realization of God. And because it's a very theistic philosophy, a theistic song of a mystic, enlightenment is not talked about in yogic terms like Sankhya would do or Patanjali would do. It is talked about in theistic terms, in terms of realization of God. And in terms of metaphysics of the world, the law of karma is accepted and given great significance by Japji Sahib. And the salvation happens largely by grace, as is the belief in most parts of devotion, Bhakti Yoga. That surrender, grace, emotion, and self-purification, and grace being the most important element of it, is the center for all approaches in Bhakti Yoga, including the approach of Japji Sahib. Having seen the philosophy, now let us look at the spiritual process that we see in Japji Sahib. Japji Sahib talks about the journey of faith, and the faith leads to enlightenment, which is very different from what Sankhya would say or what Yoga Sutra would say or yoga would say. It is a path of bhakti marga, and faith leads to enlightenment. So the spiritual process is based upon faith. Essentially three things: faith, faith, surrender, devotion, service, and japa, 5 elements. So the spiritual process is of 5 elements here. Very different from Sankhya, which goes into large amount of Jnana Yoga. Very different from yoga, which can go from Hatha Yoga to Pranayam to uh, Ashtanga Yoga. Very different from those paths, but very different. It reminds us of Bhakti Yoga. The movement here is from devotion to knowledge, not from knowledge to devotion. It is from devotion to yoga, not from yoga to devotion. It is essentially like an integral yoga anchored in Bhakti Yoga. That is the flavor of the approach of Japji Sahib as a spiritual process. Devotion here leads to the peace of mind, guidance, and enlightenment. The japa of the mantra, in terms of its shravan, listening, manan, contemplation, kirtan, recitation, it leads to establishment of an omnipotent good object inside and brings about internal changes. This is where we can understand something in a psychoanalytic terms. That the whole of Bhakti Marga and the path of Japji Sahib also, very important in this is surrender, to open up oneself for change, and idealization of an omnipotent good object, being with that omnipotent good object through listening, recitation, contemplation, being in the presence of the idol, which of course Japji Sahib doesn't talk about. Japji Sahib doesn't make use of idol worship, but other bhakti margs do. And all this lead to first a visualization, relation, and finally internalization of an omnipotent good object, and the light of it suffuses from inside and brings about very fundamental internal changes. This phenomena has not been used in psychoanalysis, but it's a very ancient, tried, tested, used phenomena in Indian spirituality. Surrender to God, surrender to that omnipotent good object, to overcome ordinary and negative movements and affects. Deep self-change is brought about by surrender to the omnipotent good object established inside of us. And it's very interesting to look at the dynamics of it psychoanalytically. One of the difficulties in overcoming negative motivations and affects in psychoanalysis is there is no counterbalancing omnipotent good object. Because in psychoanalytic process, we have reduced all supposedly omnipotent good objects into what they really are. We have stripped the emperor of their thrones. So this is, while that can help us to see reality, it doesn't help us to internalize a good, reliable, stable object, an omnipotent object, and harvest the profits that come from that process of internalizing an omnipotent good object. Extensive processes to create an omnipotent good object, relate to it, or visualize it. First, create it by visualization or in a concrete way. Relate to it, internalize it, and after internalization, bring about fundamental changes in oneself. Deep-seated, enduring changes that we have not done in psychoanalysis, very common in Indian spirituality, especially Bhakti Marg. Japji Sahib talks about spiritual realization, enlightenment through grace and agency of the Guru, grace of God and agency of the Guru, and also grace of the Guru, not by ordinary knowledge. It says silence of the mind, the state of no thought, the state of no thought, no affect, no desire, no fear, which we call the state of enlightenment, accompanied by high awareness, no thought, and bliss. Japji Sahib says, like all other Indian texts also do, all the Vedic and Upanishadic texts say the same thing, that ordinary knowledge cannot bring about the silence of the mind without foundational spiritual change and grace. Which is very true and very experiential. Enlightenment is a rare experience, and once it happens, intuitive spiritual knowledge starts happening. Even if enlightenment does not happen completely, even if you have a glimpse, a temporal short-term glimpse, even then the intuitive spiritual knowledge starts. And if you have a full, deep and wide, complete experience of enlightenment, the intuitive spiritual knowledge is even more. Access to mystical realms of existence is more. And this is a rare experience, not an ordinary experience. Japji Sahib talks about futility of ordinary knowledge, even of theology. No matter how voluminous or deep it would be, it can never bring about enlightenment. Which is very true. Japji Sahib, apart from faith, surrender, devotion, jap, also talks about two action points: service to mankind and existence, and devotion and service to the Guru. So these are the action points, the karma points on the foundation of Bhakti Yoga. So we have 5 elements here as foundational elements of the spiritual process in Japji Sahib: faith, surrender, devotion, recitation, jap, and service. Another element that Japji Sahib goes into is on the state of enlightenment. What is it like? What is the goal state towards which we are working? So the state of enlightenment, the goal state for every individual, is described in various verses. The verses are not put together. They are at different parts of the text. But if we put together all those verses which talk about enlightenment, this is what we get. The state of enlightenment is a state of high awareness. It is a state of ecstasy. It is a state of bliss. It is a state beyond description. Ancient Chinese saying on the same thing is, Tao that can be said is no Tao. So this is an ancient truth which continues in the Japji Sahib. That the state of enlightenment is a state of no thought, state of high awareness, state of bliss, occasionally ecstasy also is realized, state beyond description. So if we look at many descriptions of the state of enlightenment in Indian spiritual scriptures, Veda, Upanishad, other texts, Yoga Sutra, Brahma Sutra, the states of enlightenment have been described variously. I talked about it in the session on Yoga Sutra. Let us go over it in short. The state of enlightenment variously described is one, state of no thought and stillness. That is one definition, one elaboration of the state. So state of stillness and no thought, one. Two, state of no thought, high awareness and bliss. Three, state of pure consciousness, kevalya. Four, state of nirvana, all negating nihilistic absolute. Five, state of oneness with existence, with universe. Six, state of experiencing one's psychic being. Seven, state of experiencing oneness in the inertia or the bottom of inertia of the matter, the root of the matter. So all these seven states are referred to as states of enlightenment. What Japji Sahib picks up is the state of no thought, awareness, high awareness, and bliss. This state Japji Sahib talks of as the state of enlightenment. Japji Sahib talks about saints living in this state of bliss. And the way it describes it, it comes very close to the concept of Sthita Prajna of Bhagavad Gita, where those who are in that state live in that Ananda. That bliss is a English translation of Ananda. So the Japji Sahib continues with this idea of Sthita Prajna, Ananda in different language. The state of enlightenment also is a state of freedom from desire. It is also the state of dissolution of the ego. By ego, we mean the social ego. It won't be the system ego. And here, we come very close to the definition of a free man that Sri Aurobindo describes, the definition of a free man. And that definition of a free man that Sri Aurobindo gives, who covets nothing, despises nothing, who allows what comes to him to come, what goes from him to go. And we also look at definition of free man of J. Krishnamurti and U.G. Krishnamurti. And we see a very close parallel of the state of free man who has dissolved his ego, which is hinted at in Japji Sahib, not elaborated, hinted at. The state of enlightenment also is described in terms of high awareness, high functioning of the sense of intuition, intuitive knowledge, intuitive wisdom, and mystical knowledge. They come in the state after enlightenment or during enlightenment. Mostly after enlightenment, because during that state it would be a state of no thought. And the state is a peaceful state of an enlightened mind. Once it happens, intuition starts functioning in a more vivid way, and it reveals mystical knowledge about oneself and reality. And in reality, Japji Sahib talks about fundamental knowledge about the elementals that construct reality at all levels. So the knowledge of elementals, the metaphysical knowledge of elementals, that reveals as mystical knowledge post experience of enlightenment. On this point, the Japji Sahib comes very close to Vaishnav Mysticism. I have written Vaishnav Tantra, but I should have written Vaishnav Mysticism, a larger category, and within that, Vaishnav Tantra, of course, is an important category. Japji Sahib and Vaishnav Mysticism both are based on Bhakti Marg. Both are based on faith, surrender, devotion, jap, good action. Vaishnav Tantra uses, apart from jap, visualization, idol worship, work with yoga and chakra far more. On that point, it differs from Japji Sahib, but there is a convergence on some points. Japji Sahib also says in the state of enlightenment, what you experience is beyond words. And it takes that experience, which cannot be put into words completely, and puts it in philosophical terms on elaboration of God, that God also is beyond words. Once enlightenment happens, then how does one live? Japji Sahib hints at, does not go into elaboration of living in bliss, living by inner voice, living by God's guidance, post enlightenment. Japji Sahib doesn't use the word enlightenment, I'm using it. Japji Sahib talks about God realization. If we look at teachings of Buddha, UG Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, and the Swadharma concept of Gita, we see a similar echo of how one leads life post enlightenment. It is based upon inner voice or outer necessity, as Krishnamurti says it. Very well said. A deep guidance in the inner world and a mystical serendipity, which also connects that inner guidance to the outer world together, with some necessity, some freedom, some chance, some grace, that constitutes together life post enlightenment. One's program of life is a chief determinant, and the program of life pre enlightenment largely makes it clear how life post enlightenment is going to be, because it's one program of life. Enlightenment is a chief station in that program. From that chief station, a turn can be taken, but the turn is not completely unrelated in most cases to the pre-enlightenment life. So the pre-enlightenment program of life largely tells us about the post-enlightenment program of life. Like all approaches in Bhakti Marg, Japji Sahib also goes into the adoration of reality or adoration of God. quite some number of verses go in adoration. They sing the glory, the celestial glory of reality. They talk about the celestial worlds and universes. And the Japji Sahib never talks about multiverses, talks about netherworld, talks about heaven, the glory of creation. And when you read that, you cannot escape being reminded of a chapter in Savitri, where Sharbindo talks about the adoration of the Divine Mother. In some of those verses, we are told that God creates design and destiny, but God is behind, above and beyond that destiny. So there we recollect the definition of God as Brahma in Advaita Vedanta. That the creation which can have the stain of the gunas, they go back and merge with the Brahma, but the Brahma still remains unstained. The adoration is of the primal celestial word Om, the word from which all existence comes, or the word that comes before all existence. And the adorable reality, the adorable God, is celestial, primal. It's a reality beyond anything our mind can know. So we are in adoration of the unknowable, partly unknowable, or I would say largely unknowable. Japji Sahib then also goes into wonder. One is reminded of Heidegger's wonder at the world. And Heidegger says, we have lost this primal sense of wonder at the world, which the Greeks had. And Heidegger makes a very good statement. He says, it astonished and astonished the Greeks alone. And by it, Heidegger means existence. So Japji Sahib goes into the wonder at the world, wonder at the source of elementals, that the elementals that construct this whole world. So there is a world of matter, energy, and force, and we have some elementals which cannot be divided any further, which cannot be reduced to anything else other than themselves. These mutually exclusive fundamental elementals which come together to create the world of matter, source, matter, energy, and force. Similarly, there is a world of life and it has its own elementals, the world of mind and its own elementals. And all these constructional elementals, where they have come from, how they are operating, where they are going, there is a wonder at it. So there is wonder at the bhutas, the constructional elementals of existence. So there is wonder at the bhutas, the elementals. There is wonder at the celestial music, the origin of the music, the elementals of music, from which are springing forth from some source, and then coming together to create compounds and complexes that we call music. Similarly, there is a wonder at the source from where all beauty is springing out, source from which all knowledge is springing out, power is springing out, nature is coming out, existence is coming out. There is a wonder at that celestial source from which all elementals are coming out, ultimately creating this universe and human existence. Japji Sahib also talks about angels of the conscious mind and the unconscious mind who sing the praise of the Lord. It's very interesting to see that Japji Sahib is so clear about the conscious mind and the unconscious mind and the nether worlds. Probably there are independent nether worlds and there are some nether worlds which are gradations of the unconscious. I have added probably here because that is my surmise, not explicit in Japji Sahib, but it's explicit. Talks about angels of the conscious and the unconscious. Something we find it very difficult to appreciate in psychoanalysis, the concept of angels and non-human beings. And I believe it is a narcissistic position to say that in such a large universe, we should be the only conscious beings and nobody other than us, unlike us, or better than us. Japji Sahib talks about how heaven, earth, and nether regions all sing praise at a very elemental level of the Lord. So there is a, a celestial song at the root of reality, of all that is manifest, which we are not aware about because we are not in touch, we cannot appreciate it. Japji Sahib also talks about Maya as being springing forth from God Himself. So on this point, Japji Sahib is very different from those who say there are some schools in Indian spirituality where say God and nature both are equal and have been existing independently. Whereas some schools say even the nature comes out of God. So Japji Sahib is on that point that nature comes out of God. Maya comes out of God and it has its own purpose and significance. So Japji Sahib is in that group of Indian spiritual schools which say Maya also comes out of God and which also say Maya has a role to play, it is significant. It is not just an obstacle, but it is a collaborator in evolution. Japji Sahib talks about merger with God. And there it becomes very near. In fact, it takes the same position of deepest states of enlightenment, like the Advaita Vedanta, where they talk about merger with Brahma, which is very different from a Dvaita concept of enlightenment, where God and the soul always remain different, even if the soul is liberated. Japji Sahib talks about earth as a very special place, a place where spiritual evolution can happen in a very concrete and swift way. And it has a special place among all zones of the universe. This is an ancient idea which continues right from Vedas, Upanishads to as recent as writings of Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, that there's something special about this planet from a spiritual standpoint. Somehow it is a space where different natured zones of reality come together. It's like the heaven and the nether regions, they coming together. Consciousness and matter coming together. We don't really know completely the speciality of that special place, but what we do understand is there's something unique and special about this planet from a spiritual standpoint. Yet to find out the calculus and the mathematics of that spiritual process. What is so special that is happening here? How do we look at it from a psychoanalytic standpoint? First, we look at the philosophy. Most psychoanalytic schools don't have a philosophy. On philosophical point, Japji Sahib is very different. It is a theistic philosophy, unlike psychoanalysis, which is largely a theistic materialist. Japji Sahib gives us a very clear goal, which is enlightenment. Psychoanalysis finds it too risky to think about a goal, leaves it to an individual, each to his own. In Carl Jung, we see some movement towards this goal, individuation. But that concept has not been taken up, the concept of purpose and design in human life. The concept of design was partly taken up by Jung in Program of Life, by Erikson in the Stages of Life. But nobody takes up the idea of goal except existential psychoanalysis, but it leaves the goal to the individual. Same for logotherapy. Goal is important, but leaves the goal to the individual. Same for CBT. Appreciates the value of a positive goal, but leaves it to the individual. Japji Sahib, like Indian schools of spirituality and philosophy and psychology, are very clear. The goal of human life is enlightenment. On the goal, there is a consensus. How to reach there, each to his own. Limits of human potential are different between all schools of Indian spirituality, including Japji Sahib and psychoanalysis. Japji Sahib clearly believes we can enter a state of enlightenment, which is a state of no thought, no desire, no fear, high awareness and bliss, complete freedom from affect, objects, negative drives. Psychoanalysis doesn't even believe such limits can be reached. These are rare experiences, rare attainments. And therefore, Indian culture rewards those who are able to have this rare attainment. So the limits of human potential are far more liberal, beyond the scope of psychoanalysis, I would say, at present. If we draw a model of the mind with this understanding, we will have a very different model of the mind than the classical models we have in psychoanalysis. In fact, after Freud and Jung, we did not have model of the mind creators. Unfortunate. Thinkers with that capability and that inclination have not come to psychoanalysis. Our understanding of human motivation, satisfaction, and frustration includes the spiritual desire, spiritual quest for freedom, for goodness, for purity, for bliss and ecstasy, for internalization of omnipotence. And that changes our understanding of human motivation, satisfaction, and frustration. In Japji Sahib, like in all Bhakti Marg texts, we see voracious use of idealization and de-idealization, which is true in all devotional approaches. And we see how the idealization of the other and de-idealization of the self can be put to positive use. Very profitable, deep positive use for self-transformation. In psychoanalysis, we think of it essentially as something pathological. Idealization of the other and de-idealization of the self. But in devotion, it is very profitably used for deep-seated, enduring positive changes. Japji Sahib also talks about how being in the higher part of oneself, one establishes purity and harmony inside, the harmony of superego, the health coming from superego, the happiness and power of the superego. That can be understood, appreciated, harvested by psychoanalysis. Concepts of ananda, bliss, ecstasy, delight. And this will take us to the classification of happiness and classification of pains. And when we do that and understand in details, these concepts will become very important. And these are different experiences. Actually, I should be removing bliss from here. Put it in the bracket. So the experience of bliss, which is the experience of enlightenment, in certain states of very high intensity, one can get into ecstasy. And while one is working, but in the background you have bliss, we get the feeling of delight. Delight is the feeling you get while you're working with bliss in the background. We have to factor these things into psychoanalysis. Healing that happens from japa, mantra, devotion, and recitation of the word or listening to the word. Certain mantric words, Om of course is one. The philosophy of Japji Sahib and all spiritual texts, which bring in positivity and hope into our pessimistic lives where we have undergone disappointment and resignation, brings life back to us. Tells us celebration is intensely on all the time at deepest levels of reality. Celebration is the rule and suffering an exception. And there is a purpose of existence and individual psyche. The purpose of existence, purpose of individual, and the purpose of the psyche. And we are not into a meaningless rut where nothing goes anywhere. Regardless of the insignificance we may feel of our smallest of actions, everything is meaningful and purposive. There is a purpose for existence, purpose for the individual, purpose for the psyche. Japji Sahib also tells us about the theory of karma at work. And therefore, we have to factor this into therapy, and spiritual practices can help us to overcome some part of it. Spiritual practices done as self-work or in session can help in healing, enhancing the quality of life. But for that, we have to wait. At present, what we are talking of is blasphemy in the context of psychoanalysis, which is completely opposed to spiritual practices and quality of life. Not spiritual practices for quality of life. Sorry. Hopefully, in the next 10 years, as we see a synthesis of spirituality and psychoanalysis, spiritual practices will come into psychoanalysis and it will enhance healing and quality of life. Thank you.